Hello, and thank you for joining us. I am Nari Furter, and I work with the San Jose Public Library with our Early Education Department. And I have two very special guests with me today, my coworker and fellow librarian, Michelle Clark, and our special guest, Maria Fusaro, who is the director of the Early Childhood Institute at San Jose State University. And if you are watching this video, then you have already seen our title, which is that this is going to be a discussion about early childhood and screen time. So what does screen time look like for our youngest in our community, the children between 0 and 5 years of age? So 2020 has been a roller coaster of a year. To recap what many of us have already experienced, we had the coronavirus sending many of us back home with the shutdowns with schools, and on top of that we had the wildfires over the summer keeping us in home, and all of this has seen a big rise in the use of screen time for all ages, especially young children. And what we have been hearing from our community through our programs, through our Ref Chat service, have been a lot of parents kind of voicing their concerns about screen time. So we are here to have a discussion about screen time, what we are experiencing, what our children are experiencing, the good, the bad, what different types of screen time there are, and what new healthy habits can we incorporate into this new year regarding screen time. So I want to thank you again, Michelle and Maria, for joining me today for this discussion. Maria, I will point this first question to you. And this is something that we have seen coming up a lot, as I mentioned earlier, through our programs and through our Ref Chat services. A lot of caregivers are voicing concerns. How worried should they be about all this, about all the screen time that their children are experiencing right now?
Sure. The concerns about screen time are based on a lot of research that's been out there that has led the American Association of Pediatrics to put out recommendations about limiting screen time. We know that there's some links between excessive screen time and things like risk for childhood obesity, challenges with cognitive language development, emotion regulation, and just being able to kind of control yourself and your behavior. So those concerns are still out there. We can't take those away, but we've definitely gained a lot of perspective this year in terms of thinking about how families need to navigate various challenges that they're facing. So you mentioned the challenges of the wildfires, which really put a wrench into people's adaptation to the pandemic, and that being able to go outside and get physical activity is really important. And part of the reason we're concerned about screen time is that if children spend a lot of time on screen, it's a sedentary activity that can help explain why there's some of those links to obesity. So we know that parents, families have all been navigating direct and indirect effects of the COVID pandemic. And one of the repercussions has been that there's just fewer options for what families can do, fewer people that they can spend time with, that they can have with social interactions with their children. So one of the kind of entertaining and interesting things for kids to still be able to do typically involve screens.
That is, you do sum it up pretty well there. That so the negative impacts of extra screen time are they're pretty much there. They're the links to a lot of the effects of development in children, from their physical development to their speech and the way that they're thinking and interacting with others. But that at this point, 2020 happened, and that is what it is. So it's good for us to be aware of maybe helping shed some light on the changes that we've seen happening with children in this past year.
Right. And we know that it's that duration or amount of screen time is important. So thinking about kind of whatever tools we have to be able to come up with other ways for children to just have great learning experiences and opportunities, even within the confines of wherever they're sheltering in place.
So with the duration, is there how can we tell when a child has had too much screen time? Are there any kinds of signs that caregivers can look for to know, like, okay, now I need to cut this off, or?
Well, there's no kind of minimum recommended amount. It's not that or 0 to 5 year olds like need to have a certain amount of screen time. The AAP does set kind of a guideline around 1 hour a day for children over age 2. They generally have discouraged media use under age 2, although they refined their guidelines about that just a couple of years ago, noting that things like video chat are different and can provide opportunities for children to interact, especially in the context of things like longer distance relatives. There could also be families that are military families where a parent is deployed, and video chat might be a really great way to keep that visual connection with that family member. So the idea of video chat is one where there's kind of an exception that's made in terms of exposure to media. But in general, the idea of how much is too much, it's going to depend. Children will show that limit differently in that we want to think about things like not using screens before bedtime, making sure children are developing strategies for coping that aren't relying on screens. So if a child is having a tantrum, we should avoid giving them a screen as a way of trying to calm them down, so that they can instead develop kind of internally based ways of coping with those emotions.
Mm-hmm. That is something I do. I think we were going to discuss that a little bit later, is those positive habits around screen time. But I'm glad that you mentioned that, especially that difference of screen time with more interactive screen time when you're talking to someone, like something like Zoom or FaceTiming with family versus just watching TV. And so it's that is an interesting spin on what screen time looks like.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So moving on from sort of the amount of screen time to sort of the types of screen time, we have lots of different types of content that's available out there for children, actually, quite a wide variety. What are the different types of screen time, and which ones maybe should parents and caregivers prioritize or be more choosy about for their children?
That's a great question. And here, particularly for preschool age children, there really is a wide variety of programming that includes some really high quality programs that can support children's school readiness. So if, programs that are produced by organizations like PBS and Sesame Workshop have been designed with an intention to be educational and supportive of school readiness. And some research can back that up as well. More generally, we can think about how and I should mention that in general, television has been the subject of research for a long time because television has been around for a long time. We're still learning more every year about things like tablets and applications that are available for young children as well, in terms of whether they're supportive or not. So some things to think about are the idea of how interactive versus more passive the technology or the media is. So television generally is considered somewhat passive, although programs can include what we sometimes call participatory cues, where the character on screen might ask a question and then pause to try to get viewers to chime in with an answer, or they might kind of pose a question that gets the child kind of thinking about what they just saw. So features like that are linked to kind of engagement, especially once the child gets familiar with the program, kind of knows how it works, and they can get more engaged with that kind of interaction. Another idea is that the features that are there should be set up so that they help the child focus on what's important, and rather than being distracting. Sometimes there are fast-paced programs that are harder for children to kind of keep up with or make sense of, and that's not as supportive of their learning. So having a pace that children can keep up with, incorporating things like repetition, which we know for a long time supports learning. Those are kinds of features that are linked to better learning or understanding.
Oh, great. So that gives us an idea as to what things to look out for. And like you said, be more, maybe more conscientious of what it is that we're choosing. So it's, as the parent or the caregiver, we're making the choice first, so that we can feel a little bit better about the screen time, the quality of screen time that we are having with our child, and that it is supportive of them rather than just a distraction.
Right. And I also should mention background television, background media use, where maybe the TV is on just for the household more generally, as opposed to being on with a child-focused program. There's research that shows that that kind of background television can be disruptive when children are trying to engage in play, and it can be linked to less parent-child conversation. So it can be a distraction for the parent as well, in terms of just having normal everyday interactions that can be supportive of their child's learning.
Okay. That's good. That's really good to know. Is there sort of a difference when it comes to not only the type of the different type of screen time, but also interacting with that screen time with your children?
Definitely, there's been a lot of interest in that, because we know that in general, children learn a lot from person-to-person interaction. So whether it's kind of a virtual interaction, that's one question, but also the actual people around them, how are they engaging with the child as the child uses the media? So at the basic level, being with a child as they're participating in media might make it more a positive experience for the child, kind of as an engagement. But going beyond that, asking the child questions about what they see, kind of reteaching what they are presenting can be really helpful, especially for our young learners. They might not make the connection of like what's happening on this in terms of what's happening on the screen. That repetition can help. And even realizing how what they see on the screen relates to something in their everyday life can be a challenge. So if there's a program that they're watching about trains, they might not realize that the train that they saw in their community or the train that they play with on a pretend train track have any connection to each other. So sometimes we need, even though it's obvious to adults that what we see on TV can have some connection, those bridges might need to be built with the support of an adult or older peer.
Oh, that's great. That's really good to know. Thank you.
Sure. Never thought of it that way, about children making those connections from what they see to even just a toy like that's actually in their hands while they're holding their toy train, watching something about a toy train, but still that's still the connection that needs to be helped to create. So that's I didn't think of it that way. So that does shed some light on how children are interpreting what they are seeing.
Another word for that in the lingo is transferring what they learn, being able to apply what they learn from TV into through real world, especially when it's nonfiction in particular.
So it seems like with caregivers, there's a lot to consider here with screen time. It's maybe taking a step back now that we're in a new year. It's a chance to kind of start off some new habits, some new goals with screen time. And we all had to get through 2020 the best we could. And if we all had a little bit of extra screen time or a lot of extra screen time, that was 2020. And, we can reflect on what we did, but now it's a great chance for caregivers to really look towards 2021 and think about what kind of tweaks to make to kind of reset and step away from some of the negative habits that had built up. So it's sounding like one of the first things that caregivers can do is really just take a step back and first examine how much screen time is going on in their household for their child. And then just within that screen time, try to prioritize what screen time their child is experiencing. So looking for shows that are more interactive, like PBS, and then maybe incorporating screen time activities like, say, our library Zoom preschool and storytime programs, or Zoom FaceTime with family, Zooming or FaceTiming with family and friends. How does that play a role with the different types of screen time? And is that something that should be considered like a separate type of screen time because it's more interactive and has a live person, maybe not in the same room, but has that direct, immediate interaction? And how can families kind of balance those two?
I think that we'll probably see a lot of research in the next few years that have to do with video chat, just because of how much we're using it now, and whether there's how we can maximize it, and the same kind of questions that you raised about how much is too much. In general, like we always think about with child development, we want to think about the child's kind of balance of experiences across domains of development. So if they're doing screen time more now, what is it that they might be doing less of as a result. So there's not going to be one answer that's going to relate the same to every family. One variation that we can mention is how some families have multiple siblings where there's just a ready playmate potentially available all the time. And so the effects of the pandemic have maybe been different than for a family with maybe one child, or one where the children are farther apart in age, where they can't necessarily go to a park and interact with children on a more kind of random basis. So families really need to kind of think about, who they have available for the child safely to interact with, and what other experiences they can create for the child. We can include more outdoor activities when the weather cooperates as well, so that children are getting that physical activity and opportunities to spend time outdoors as well. When it comes to other habits, families have routines throughout their day that we can think about in terms of how screen time may or may not play a role. So things like, what's the first thing the child tends to do in the morning? And then what's the last thing that they tend to do as they get ready for bed? What are the meal times looking like? To the extent that we can leave screens out of those routines, it's just one more way of trying to cut back on that duration of media exposure. So thinking about ways of, even if we've slipped in the past year in terms of letting children watch TV later in the evening, we do want to try to keep that time before bedtime clear of screen time so that children's sleep is less disrupted. Keeping screens, maybe the screens had gone into the bedroom. We want to try to get that habit broken and keep screens out of the bedroom so that children kind of have that place in their house where that's screen free. So those are some of the ideas where families might take steps towards developing healthy media habits in their families.
I like that concept of screen-free zones. It's sort of like reclaiming your space and being able to bring in more of the activities that you want to see in the house. I know I always like to think of things that helps me personally whenever I want to incorporate a new habit or change something or break an old habit, is to try to think of it as a positive spin. So it's not, because then thinking of it as a negative spin can kind of make it overwhelming if we want to think of it as, okay, I need to cut back my child's screen time by 3 hours. Or 1 hour or half hour, whatever have you. We all know with children that it can be tricky for them to transition away from screens. So what would be helpful is to not think of it as taking something away from the child, but as giving them something new. So it's not so much taking away screen time, but as bringing in more outside time, bringing in more introduction to chores, to helping with household activities like putting away dishes in the dishwasher or helping sort the laundry or even just playing with the laundry, but just being involved with those day-to-day family activities where screen time may have come in as sort of a Band-Aid for families where either both parents are working from home or they just, or both parents, or just whatever the situation is, the caregiver has activities that they need to do that that prevents them from being able to spend all day long with their child. And so I think we've seen that screen time has come in as a lot of that. I don't want to say a babysitter, but as that intermedium, as that middle part of what do I do to get my work done. My child can watch a few cartoons here and there. And so it could be one of the ways to kind of spin it is to involve them more in like the family activities when possible.
There's certainly ways to kind of have the positive steps that we can take. And this would be both for the adults in our households as well as the children. So thinking about our own screen use, maybe there's opportunities to incorporate outdoor time into our own work, whether it's some aspects of the work that we do that can maybe happen outside while we're able to supervise children and maybe in a yard or outdoor space. Maybe elements of housework can be done outdoors, just as a different way of changing up how we tend to do our day-to-day activities. I think that it's a great point that we need to think about this as not only, it can be hard to do this, but to recognize that for those families who are staying home more, this is a chance to get to know your child more and spend more time together. And it can be hard under stress to remember that in the moment, but we know that children really depend and lean on those relationships with parents, and now more than ever because of the stresses that families are facing.
Right. And, with a necessary reminder that we as grown-ups are the child's first role model. They will copy and replicate what they see us doing. So it's a good reminder for us to also be a little bit more mindful of our screen use and what we are doing in front of our child. I've read that one thing that has been beneficial is if children see their grown-up on a screen, it's for grown-ups to say, I'm checking my work email right now, or I am sending a message to grandma and grandpa right now. It puts in perspective for the child what the technology is being used for, rather than just being this mysterious object that has like infinite powers and can produce entertainment at the touch of a button. Where do you think that it would be helpful for adults to kind of have those conversations with children about what screen time is used for?
I think that's a great question. It can be harder for our younger children to realize that there's a difference between doing something on the screen that has a work versus more of a social function to it. And we are all kind of coping as adults with work demands that are changing and adapting as well. So to the extent that we can do the kind of positive work-life balance of being able to either be on for work or not on, that generally is what we can maybe keep in mind as we're trying to approach our time as like, this is one time that I'm playing with my child and really trying to be present in the moment during those activities. It's a great point that sometimes those work emails will come in and we might need to respond to them right away. But to be able to do it in a way that media is not overly consuming us as adults is important as well.
All right. Well, this was a wonderful discussion, and I want to sum it up in a few key takeaways for our viewers today. Is one, be mindful of the duration of time that your child is in front of a screen. Try to track it for a few days, see the trends, look for routines. When have screens been popping up and throughout the day that weren't there before? Another takeaway is being mindful of just what types of screen times they're exposed to. Are they doing a Zoom program that's live and interactive, or are they watching a cartoon that's just very passive viewing? And also don't forget to think about your role during this time. Are you with them watching the cartoons? Are you talking about it, asking them questions? If you can't be with them while they are watching, then definitely follow up afterwards and try to, the concept of repetition, of comprehension. What did they watch? Can they tell you anything about the show that they just sat in front of? It'll help them building their vocabulary and keeping up with those cognitive skills. And a third takeaway is to just try to bring in more of those healthier habits, setting screen-free zones, incorporating more outside time throughout your day. And I think one key element to all of this is to take small steps. It took us a full year to get to where we are. It's not going to change overnight. So taking small steps to slowly scale back our screen use and to slowly bring back our old habits that we want to have back into our routines. Is there anything else, Michelle and Maria, that you would like to add?
I think I just briefly want to add that as with any introduction of new habits, especially when you're trying to create these new habits as a family, to not only take small steps, but be okay if things don't go the way that you were expecting them to manage expectations and to really be communicative, even with your child who, is young, but is still receptive to what you are experiencing, receptive to what you're saying. That, explaining what you're doing and doing it together rather than, this is something that they have to do. This is something that is only seeming to affect them directly, and to really take it on as a group effort. and to really support each other too, partners and other caregivers within the family, because maybe a family has multiple caregivers, to really do it do it together, to come up with these sort of screen-free zones, to come up with ideas for activities to do and more activities to incorporate that takes the place of maybe additional screen time, and to do it together and to give each other a little bit of grace as well.
Absolutely. And I would add too that there's a lot of adapting that we're all being forced to do. We have to just adjust based on what's going on in the community. At the same time, children are developing even as these months go on, so that some of the challenges that we experienced at the beginning of shelter in place might be different now as the child has just moved forward in their development. So just being aware that change is always challenging, and it takes some time to adjust and kind of figure out what the new normal is, and and parents should just be thinking about how they can do what they can within their means to be able to have opportunities for children to still engage in something that's meaningful and a learning opportunity, even if it's at the home or in their immediate environment.
And at the end of the day, caregivers, parents, you are there for your child. That is the most important thing, is that you are physically there to be with them during this time, and that we acknowledge you, acknowledge all of your hard work and the stress that you are going through. This has not been an easy time for any of us. We all did what we had to do to get through this last year. And so this next year is a chance to rewrite the chapter of our lives and kind of take more ownership of where we're going. And again, start small, start with your family, and we'll get through it with this year. Check back with the public library. We'll have plenty of resources for you on our blog. If you are interested in our Storytime or preschools programs, you can sign up through our sjpl.org/events page. And we hope to speak to you soon. You can reach out to us at earlyeducation@sjlibrary.org. Thank you so much for watching tonight.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.